Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. This is Doug Jury speaking. Thank you so much for joining the webinar today with NFINIT FoolProof Backup. And I'm from Zadara Storage, and I'm going to be go ahead and leading some of this today. We're going to let a few other people trickle in. Looks like we have a pretty good crowd coming in so far. So I'm going to go ahead and just let another minute or two go by and go ahead and grab your last cup of coffee and get yourself all settled in, and we'll be right back with you. Thank you so much for joining. All right, folks, I see the clock just hit the top of the hour, and we have a few more people trickling in, so I'm going to probably just stay on the line here for a few more minutes, maybe one more minute, and we'll let a couple other people get settled. And again, thank you so much for joining us on today's FoolProof Backup as a service and object storage. So we're going to have a little bit of fun today and kind of get through some of the tough conversations that I think everybody's having in their back room nowadays, especially with us all working remote. Backup is just even more important because maybe you're not able to get there and to tend to the backup jobs perhaps the way you used to be. So sometimes some of these topics might be germane to what you're going through each day as well. So, all right, so with that, I see the attendee list is kind of trickling off, but I'm sure people will continue to come in. Who we have today on the panel is myself. I'm Doug Jury, the VP of Product Marketing at Zadara. Been here pretty much since the start. And we have also Jeremy Fitzpatrick from NFINIT. He's the Vice President of Marketing and Sales, and Marcus Bauer is our Vice President of Technology. So we're going to all be chiming in. We're going to do this what we call sportscaster mode. And sportscaster mode is that we're going to all, kind of have a conversation on some of these slides as we go back and forth. And I think it makes it a little bit more interesting. You'll also get the slide deck, which will be, so you don't have to take a lot of notes. We'll give you the slide deck after this, and it's also being recorded. Now, there is a question and answer session on your console that you should be able to see. If you want to type in some questions as we go through, that's fine. We may answer some of those as we go forward, and we may also choose to answer those at the end of the session. So we're planning on going about 52 minutes, and then we'll leave room for some questions and answers at the end. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Jeremy for a moment, and he's going to go ahead and explain a little bit about NFINIT and what's going on over there.
Perfect, thanks, Doug. I'll give you a quick overview of who NFINIT is. We've been in the industry for 30 years now, and we've kind of been the foundation of the IT community, initially operating facilities and networks that hosted customer-owned infrastructure. In 2015, we actually launched our first cloud offering, thus expanding our market reach. We did this, it was a very sound technology at the time, but we didn't really have the in-house expertise to really be able to continue the roadmap for that, and even more, allow customers to fine-tune their applications to our infrastructure. We corrected that in 2017 as we recruited in a wealth of subject matter expertise as well as some acquisitions along the way, and thus transformed our company from a primarily 4% of our revenue being colo and network to 39% in 2020 for cloud and managed services. This is really done from some principles that we hold dear. We look at a very platform agnostic approach to balancing the unique technical, financial, and political requirements of each customer. We work with our customers side by side to really gain an understanding of their applications and understand their workflows and how their users are using the applications to really determine the best fit for that particular use case. To do this, we have leveraged platforms that customers might not be able to design and manage on their own. These consist of public cloud assets, both AWS and Azure, our NFINIT community cloud platforms, NFINIT data center services, as well as incorporating client in-house data center assets into a comprehensive solution to achieve workload optimization. Kind of associate this to like the Home Depot of IT. We use multi-tenancy to create a financial benefit with like group purchasing, and then we add a subject matter expertise on top of that. This brings us back to kind of what our relationship with Zadara is and why Infinite is invested in this partnership. So, Doug, I'll give it back to you to give us a little bit on Zadara.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jeremy. Appreciate that. So yeah, what we like to say is Infinite, the storage as a service is powered by Zadara. And so what we did 9 years ago to give us a little bit of a history lesson and the genesis of Zadara is we sat down at a table back in 2011, and we're a bunch of enterprise grade storage type people. We've been doing storage. I've been doing storage personally since the 1981-82 days of Digital Equipment Corporation back in StorageWorks. And so I remember the half a gig and the 1 gig drives that that weighed 100 pounds. So I remember those days. And so what we decided to do back in 2011 is come out with kind of 3 different pillars here, if you will: enterprise grade performance and security. So we wanted to be able to kind of meet the charge of what I call table stakes, the ability to have all the things that go into enterprise grade performance, although albeit I think ours is a bit better than everybody else's, and I'll show you a little bit of that on the next slide. But dedicated solid drives and hard drives, we're not of the mind that everything needs solid state drives today, especially for backup and archive and things like that. So we do a lot of hard drive work. We do caching in the middle and things like that. But we also said for the security piece, we have to have this built in with in-flight and at-rest encryption. We have to have snapshots and mirroring. We have to really make this a reek of enterprise grade storage qualities. Now, that's an easy part. It really is today. All those are available today, and we use something called the software-defined storage stack. But as we move over to the right, think about this. 9 years ago, much more difficult to say, first of all, I want this to be somewhat of almost an infinite type of storage. I want it to be able to grow and grow and grow, but I only want to charge my customers and pay only for the usage. So I want to be able to, basically be on-prem, in the cloud. I want to scale up. I want to scale down. I want to pay for what I use. And I also want to get rid of this hardware upgrade, this migration into new technologies. I want to take care of all that and make this 100% as a service to be able to do that. So remember, we've been doing this for about 9 years now and very successful. And then if you're going to make these other 2 work well, you have to also augment this with this management that just comes with it. It just kind of rolls right in. So you have 24/7, 365 proactive support, migration support, upgrades, and so forth. Now, our partners at Infinite, they're going to basically take a lot of the heavy lifting for you folks as their customers, but we're standing kind of in the shadows, making sure that all this works extremely well. So fully featured, fully elastic, and fully managed. There's very few companies that can actually check all 3 of these boxes as we basically roll this out. So in the interest of making this really a foolproof backup, I didn't want to go into the storage solution quite so deep, but this slide will tell a lot of the story. Is if you basically consider up at the top here, these are kind of what we're going to call storage nodes, and these are just x86 servers, standard servers, part of our software-defined storage stack. Each in those servers, they have cores or just computing cores, just chips. And then so as a customer starts to consume our storage or our devices, we want to be able to do a couple of things. We want to be able to allocate resources. So basically each customer is isolated and protected by anything else. So in this particular case, this first customer wanted, say, a database as a service, and they're going to create, Infinite's going to create a 400 engine and some drives, and that is completely isolated for their core controllers, their disks, their memory, their cache, the logins, the encryption, the snapshot, the mirroring. Everything is completely encapsulated and isolated at what we're going to call a VPSA here, a virtual private storage array, and that's going to be based on SSD drives. Now, when we go down to the middle one, we have hard drives and cache. That's going to be our kind of our hybrid tier here. And in this particular case, they wanted to maybe create a NAS tier with a 400 engine and 10 drives. Now, it's really important to understand that each of these resources or elements are isolated and dedicated to you. And one of my favorite stories is Verizon. Verizon basically was looking for an as-a-service business, and they basically could not select a lot of the companies out there because it was part of a multi-tenant architecture, but not a single tenant experience. They couldn't basically decide where their drives were. They didn't know where their drives were. It was all one big pool. But really the patent that Zadara has sought out over the last 9 years is to have this isolation, to be able to have a tier 1, a tier 2, And then object storage with immutability and record locking, which we're going to talk about a lot more as we get into this backup. So we can also do file, we can do block, we can do object, we can do all of it here. And this is really what makes NFINIT such a great partner of ours, is these are really the devices and the products that they bring to market to you folks. And we're just the technology behind the scenes, enabling them and having them stand up some of this technology. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Jeremy.
Excellent. So we'll walk through the agenda of what we're going to be talking about here today. We're going to go over data sprawl and what the global data acceleration looks like. We're going to talk about data protection. We're going to talk about the backup and tiered storage. We're going to talk about how multi-tier storage is going to help impact the negative results of the growth of data. Then we're going to dive into the NFINIT platform, as well as looking at decision criteria for your decision making down the road. Go ahead, Doug. All right, so first, before we talk about protecting the world's data, we got to understand the trends that we're up against. As this slide says, it's estimated that by 2025 that the global data creation rate will increase by 4 times today's rate. This is driven by IoT, AI, and big data application adoption. It's also heavily weighted. I'm sure the Googles and the Facebooks of the world are really impacting this number, but really impact is going to happen to organizations of all sides. It hits home for me because I look at my network at home and I've got 30 devices on my network, from light switches to fridges, that are all reporting data and looking for things that's going somewhere and being stored somewhere to track trends and make sure that they're correcting issues with these devices. Storage tiering is going to be critical to combating this growth, and most of this data that's being created and accelerated is unstructured data, which actually is perfect for object storage. Doug, next slide. All right, so if we're looking at what a zettabyte is, because when I first heard that, it didn't really come into perspective for me. Today I'm sitting inside of NFINIT Lightwave Data Center, which we here house about 2,000 racks. So if we're looking to house a zettabyte, it would take 1,023 more of these data centers to host a single zettabyte. Now think about 175 zettabytes in 2025. Mind blowing. Next slide. So in addition to the data growth, there's more bad news here. The importance of the data is growing too, which means we're going to be more inclined to protect and make that data available. 451 Research reports that 75% of business leaders surveyed believe that the data will be more valuable in their organization a year from now. The monetization of data is a critical component of all the business strategies that are happening out there today. You think about the biotech industry, for example, and how collaboration on a project and access to data from one study will allow another company to pick up where they left off and dramatically cut down the time to market and significantly lower the cost of the study. This is happening today in our world, and is a very, very good use case for why this data is becoming more important and needs to stay protected and accessible. And if we're looking at the financial impact and what happens with the budgets to protect this expanding data set, let's ask the question, does your 5-year IT budget support this sprawl? If you're looking at an average company of 100 terabytes of a data set in 2020, it is estimated that it's going to cost them $150K annually to store it. In 2025, that estimated data set with a 372% growth, that same company would need $600,000 of budget to store that annually. Even if this hypothetical company experienced 50% of that projected growth, you still would need a $275,000 budget annually to support that. By the way, this data is just looking at the primary data set, and it doesn't even reflect on what the budget for backup and other things. All right. So how do you combat this financial impact of this data sprawl? The big picture is ILM, Information Lifecycle Management. It's out there. People are talking about it. Some companies have a good handle on it. Most do not. Data retention policies have been determined by the business leaders that are very, very huge in making sure we're building out a good information lifecycle management strategy. It's up to IT to enforce these policies. Understanding the data lifecycle that includes things like daily change rate, user access rates, protection strategies, and useful life, and when that data needs to be destroyed and let go, are various things that need to be defined by the business. Next, utilizing the right infrastructure to support ILM is key. And from a procurement standpoint, it's good to understand your organization's desires to whether have on-demand OpEx model or if a predictable CapEx model is more appealing, and make sure that you're aligning with that model. And then obviously understanding the total cost of ownership of data. So it's not just the procurement cost and the support cost, but adding in the data center cost, the manpower to support it, and everything else that goes into calculating what a real cost per gig is going to be. And the last big picture item here is making sure you have a business continuity plan in effect, and you're testing it to make sure you know how it will handle should a event occur. Not having a plan in place and having a reactive approach will destroy a budget. You see people who are either getting victims from ransomware and have to either pay a fine or bring in specialists to recover. It's an astronomical hit to the budget.
So let's go ahead and take us down the data protection and business imperative here. Let's go ahead and take a look at some of the things based on the the foolproof backup that we're talking about today. If you look at IDC, University of Texas, and Gartner, they all have a lot of different interesting numbers here. And you folks may have lived through some of these events perhaps or seen other companies. Data loss can put a business out of business. I mean, absolutely, this is what's happening, and this is why we want to get it right. This is why we want to really take an hour of our day today to learn a little bit more about backup and things going on here. So 60%, IDC says 60% of companies have experienced a data breach. It's funny because I have a lot of tracking on my own credit information and things like that, but I basically get, I don't want to say weekly, but maybe monthly or bi-monthly emails that something happened to my data out there in the world, and we all see this happening around us. 94% of companies that suffer a catastrophic data loss do not survive. And so we want to make sure that we're protecting that, and we're going to kind of take you through this whole piece here. And then 50% of tape backups. This is frightening. 50% of tape backups fail to restore. What people do, I remember I actually was working in the tape library business, DLT tapes for many years, and what people would do is they would back it up. They would basically maybe even remove the cartridges from the library, and they would basically put them in a vault, and they would hope that they never have to go to those tapes. And if they do, hopefully that the tapes would work. Now, we're not using tape today too much, but they're saying that there's an awful lot of companies out there that are still on tape today, maybe as their tertiary backup. And a lot of that tape just simply won't work if it's required to recover your business. So as we go through this, Jeremy, go ahead and take us through a little bit of the root causes here.
Certainly. I think most people, when they think about the potential causes for an outage, think of natural disasters or system failures inside their infrastructure, which is very common. However, you can see from the chart above that almost 50% of the outages that impact and cause data loss are based on either cybercrime or human error. So there's definitely a lot of things out there to guard from that aren't the common things that come to mind. So ransomware, being a big one of those things, is actually accelerating as we've hit this COVID period. And I think the statistic on the last slide of 22% of outages attributed to cybercrimes is drastically understated now. In 2018, we actually put up a blog, and we were tracking these events as they hit the news. We thought that was very compelling for the case of investing in security and DR services. Didn't take long for us to give up on that. By 2019, we realized it was too much to keep up with, and that project kind of fizzled out. The media is doing that job for us today, and it's everywhere. COVID has accelerated the trend, and not only is it just picking up in the number of instances, companies of all size and industries are becoming victims. I mean, even if you look at this, a dog charity company was attacked with ransomware. So looking at the Sophos report for the state of ransomware in 2020, they interviewed 5,000 companies, and of those companies, it was remarkable, 51% had experienced were victims of ransomware. And in those attacks, 73% were successful in encrypting data, which is astronomical. 56% of the companies that got their data back recovered from a successful backup strategy versus the 26 that actually paid the ransom. So that leads us to, let's talk about what a successful backup strategy looks like.
Perfect. Let's go ahead. So I want to talk a little bit about this. Maybe it looks a little silly, but we talk about the zip code, and this is basically from our partners and our friends at Veeam, 32110. Now, one day I was giving this slide, and I said, I wonder where 32110 is, and it's actually a small town in Florida somewhere. But it really works out really well when you start to explain a technology with something that's very memorable, if you will. So I always say that if you really, really want the picture of your grandmother, you're going to basically have it on different devices, and you're going to have multiple copies of it. So I always do, if I have pictures or music or things like that, I'm going to basically make copies of it. I'm going to try to make sure that it's in different media types, maybe my hard drive and maybe a thumb drive or something like that. I'm not such a stickler of offsite, but if I was running a business, I certainly would be. And then I want one that's immutability, immutable or air gapped, and I'm going to explain what that is in just a moment. And then I want to make sure that I test it. Like they said, 50% of all tape backups, are unusable. So basically, I want to adhere to some practices that allow me to ensure that I have the ability to walk through this 32110 and be able to do that. What the requirements are here is we basically want to make sure that our data is completely protected from the threats of all types, even ransomware, which is really becoming the biggest one. And then we want to make sure that our partnership has this storage, the multi-tenancy, the multi-location, all the pieces that we're going to talk about here today. So let's go ahead and explode this a little bit, expand this a little bit into something, as far as organizations go. So let's say that we have our production storage running on site or in a co-location or in a cloud or doing something of that manner. And we want to back it up. So we simply want to back it up, and let's go ahead and use Veeam in this case, because this is their phraseology with a 32110. So we're going to make a backup copy. That's what everybody understands today. We make a backup copy, and that basically allows us to have, and we're going to put this on the performance tier. We're going to maybe put that on SSD drives or maybe hard drives with caching, and we're going to be able to do that very quickly so I can get the backups done, and I'm not going to impact anything. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump offsite. I'm going to use a product called Cloud Connect, which NFINIT is a partner of because they're part of the Veeam partnership. And now I'm going to also make a copy, whether it be into DC1 for the immutability and DC2. So we'll go to DC2 here for a moment. We're going to create this geo-redundant repository. And I'm also going to get DC1. I'm going to basically create a long-term retention with immutability. Now, all immutability, when you see that lock on object storage, what that means is that it has what the standard is called object lock in compliance mode. And all that means is that it's like, everybody's probably familiar with the technology worm, write once, read many. So what this means is that object storage can be written once, it can be read, of course, for recoverability, but it can't be written again. Basically, it is locked. And so that's what allows you to protect yourself from ransomware, because ransomware is very clever, and it's going to go over there and it's even going to find your backup set, and it's going to overwrite the backup set. So if I ended up with ransomware on production storage, I'd be able to go to my backup. If my backup local has also the ransomware, I might go to my geo-redundant. And if that has the ransomware, I'd go to my last ditch here, which would be the immutability storage in DC1 in this case, and I would be able to recover from that. So basically, this will save hundreds of thousands, in some cases millions of dollars, for people to be able to recover from this immutable storage. Now, the last piece here. So now we have 32110. We have 3 copies. We have 2 different media types. We have one which is offsite. We have immutability and air gap, and then we have the ability to test this using a feature called Data Labs. And what Data Labs says is I can spin up a VPSA at one of the NFINIT locations, and I can actually test the data to see if I could indeed recover from an event that happened here. So while I'm on this slide, I'm going to talk about a question that came in. And the question is, Doug, can I mix SSDs and hard drives in the same VPSA? And the answer is yes, absolutely yes, I can. So what's going to happen is the NFINIT engineer is going to create a single VPSA, maybe a fast solid state pool, and maybe a mid-range hard drive pool. And maybe even in that case, I could also do object storage and be able to do that all through the same isolation that we talked about on the previous slide. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to you, Jeremy. I'm sorry, this one's going to go to Marcus. Sorry about that.
No worries. Thank you, Doug. So, folks, taking this conceptual approach that Doug and Jeremy was talking about into a more practical application one, when you look at the implementation of this zip code approach, you're looking at data tiering or a practical implementation of information lifecycle management. As a reminder, the principle of information lifecycle management is the principle of placing data on the media according to the data's criticality, the cost of the media, and accessibility requirements. So specifically to the backup, the FoolProof backup case that we're talking about here, when you look at a data set, it is imperative that you identify the operational and business requirements as well as the criticality. This is also commonly combined into those two keywords, RPO and RTO, that I'm sure you've all heard. The idea is, as you can see in this graph, the amount of data increases, the probability of access to the data decreases over time. So it is important to identify those where the red line does the large steps. That's where you identify the various tiers. This particular example shows 3 tiers using the Veeam vernacular: performance, capacity, and archive. In this particular case, we've identified the performance tier to be regular block storage, quote unquote regular block storage. The capacity tier is where the bulk of the backups lie. Is on object-based storage, and the archive is a separate kind of outlier operation that takes copies of your data for industry and regulatory requirements, compliance requirements primarily, and writes them out to your storage of choice. The GFS here stands for the grandfather, father, son scheme. So talking about the performance tier, this screenshot actually shows the Veeam application, and you can see a scale-up backup repository, as it's called in Veeam lingo, that consists of a local block-level storage and our NFINIT AO object-based storage as the capacity tier. Again, as I mentioned earlier, the GFS part of it is defined somewhere else. The other key part of this, what I wanted to show here is, as you can see on the left in the navigation pane, you have the various storage providers that you can configure according to your needs. This can be block, this can be OBS, it could be NAS, it could be deduping appliances, even tape or VTL, or even external storage providers such as NFINIT. This screenshot shows a configuration of the capacity tier. You can see the NFINIT AO object-based storage is configured here, and this system is configured to push backups that are older than 30 days out to the capacity tier.
It's funny. It's funny, Marcus. If I was in a classroom right now and I asked for a show of hands, I bet, maybe better than half of the crowd would say, do they back up to the same tier of storage regardless of what they're doing? And what really is elegant here is the ability to separate the different tiers of storage, probably much more cost effective by doing it this way. So this is actually pretty cool to be able to segment the different types of tiers for the different types of backup ingredients. So this is great.
Yeah, great point, Doug. That's exactly the principle behind this. Again, the principle of information lifecycle management, placing the data on the appropriate media according to not only criticality and accessibility, but also cost. The automatic tiering that we're doing here, not only does it happen out of the box, but it also allows the business to leverage, again, the appropriate costing tiers for storage for the particular piece of data.
Yep, and that's what it's all about. Absolutely right.
And again, regulatory and industry compliance requirements. I'm sure there's a number of you out there, keyword SOX and HIPAA and PCI and all these kind of things. The weekly backups, monthly backups, quarterly backups. This is kind of more the traditional approach that we've been doing for the past 20, 30 years of IT backups. It still is relevant and it still is necessary. So this can be pushed out to the storage target of your choice, again, depending on your business requirements, on-site, in the cloud, geo-dispersed, or a combination thereof, whatever the business requires to achieve their requirements. So adding, again, to Doug's point earlier, adding an additional piece of data protection is the immutability, which essentially is a fancy word of saying it's read-only. The key from a technical perspective here is that the underlying architecture needs to support this kind of technology. Think of immutability as and I'm showing my age here, my apologies in advance, but if you remember the old cassette days, there used to be a little latch on top of the cassette that you would punch out to prevent the cassette from being essentially, in IT terms, overwritten. That you would record over it. Conceptually, it's much the same. It's this little latch that tells the underlying storage and the application that consumes the storage, hey, you can't touch this piece of storage, this piece of data. I'm sorry.
And you know what? I have cassettes. I'm sorry. I still have cassettes. I still have the Doors. I still have LA Woman. I still have that kind of stuff. And I remember putting a little piece of tape over it so I could re-record over it. But you can't do that on immutable storage. That's for sure.
Nope.
That's for sure.
Yeah. So immutability, obviously, we can achieve this in a number of different ways. This just lists a few of the possibilities you can deploy to achieve, the safety of your data. Obviously, there's tape media. Doug talked about it earlier. Even if it's not worm, you can take the tapes, you remove them from the library, and put them in a vault somewhere. It comes with its benefits but also significant drawbacks. Replicated VMs, we're in the age of virtualization. Every platform out there, be it VMware, Hyper-V, Zen, or whatever it is, has the capabilities of creating copies and pushing them out to secondary sites or storage arrays. There's the native capabilities of the storage itself in doing snapshots and pushing those out to a geo-dispersed site, if that's your flavor. And simple, very simple way of achieving immutability is you copy the backup to a storage device and you turn the storage device off. This may seem a little strange on the surface, but I would remind everyone that the practice of using external USB hard drives to secure backups and put them in vaults is actually commonplace. So what we obviously recommend is something that is more automated and more supported by the underlying technology, and that's when we're looking at the immutable backups that Doug and I and Jeremy already talked about. The little switch that tells the application and the storage that hey, no one can touch this data, or also using the Veeam Cloud Connect capacity, which air gaps the storage itself from the entity that is consuming that particular piece of storage.
Yeah, this technology has just evolved over the last year or so, really in a big way. When we start to read about all these companies that are being held ransom for basically getting their data back and so forth, that it's really should be on one of the top items on your to-do list, is at least to look further into this kind of technology. So Jeremy, I'm going to go ahead and bring you up on this one. I'm going to go ahead and fill it for you. There you go.
So with all the moving parts that we've talked about, it's no wonder that we're seeing backup as a service adoption on the rise. Definitely keeps a lot of the complexities that are native to managing these platforms out of the daily business and lets the company focus on what they do best, which is revenue generation activities. On top of that, some things that need to be considered when looking at moving to an external cloud provider for these services is ability to avoid costs surrounding buying the infrastructure and the maintenance contracts that go with it, putting up the network and the data center that is removed by leveraging a service provider for this. On top of that, from a security standpoint, with Veeam in particular, you're able to create a SSL encryption layer from the data source to the destination. So once again, it just makes the manageability of it much easier and able to happen without a lot of complexity and management. One of the things that I think is imperative is make sure you're picking a provider and a solution that allows for transparency, like looking at making sure you understand, what's being done, when it's being done, and how it's being done. I always say, trust but verify. On top of that, the integration into a service provider's infrastructure gives you access to their cloud infrastructure, their cloud platforms, and you can, if there's an incident, you're able to leverage that to get your applications back online in case of emergency. So there's lots of benefits to the adoption of cloud backups. In addition, so this right here, what we're looking at is a high-level bird's-eye view of the integrated business continuity platform here at Infinite. This integration brings technical and financial benefits. From a financial standpoint, tiering the applications and the associated data to reflect what the business criticality is definitely the first step and will pay dividends if done well. This allows for the right balance between the technical investment and the business value of that data. And this is where, once again, when we talk about this is where we establish the RTOs and the RPOs. Looking at the upper left-hand corner, you can see there we've kind of tiered out the applications and the associated VMs that support them, and we've given them an assigned tier rating of 1 through 4. This allows us, once again, to say, okay, 1 is mission critical. We need to invest everything to make sure this is online and available no matter what. 4, okay, we need to make sure the data is relevant and able to access it should we need it. So the Infinite platform is built with a multiple of tiers of storage, both at the local site and the geodiverse site, which allows you to balance the performance requirements and the low cost of long-term archiving all in one. If you look at the upper right-hand corner, integration into the Infinite DR cloud once again allows you to move that data from a production environment and from a geodiverse site into the DR cloud very seamlessly and without a lot of cost.
And now
that being said,
I was just going to say, and we have sites ready. We have the tiered storage ready. We have the Veeam architecture ready. This is all ready to go. Correct, Jeremy? I mean, we could basically onboard customers very quickly to this whole new ILM enabled backup structure.
That is correct. Everything is pre-integrated and customizable, which I think is a huge benefit so that we can adjust even on the fly. So if you have something that's a lower priority in a backup/DR state, but all of a sudden an event becomes a much more of a priority, we can fine-tune that in the DR site to allow for access from end users and power it up to get back to business continuity.
Yep, exactly right. A lot of people look at this as kind of a science project, if they were to do it themselves. And trust me, you don't want to do it yourself. You want to bring in the professionals, and that's really what this diagram is all about, all the moving parts. So let's go ahead and dive into object storage. A lot of these pieces that we're talking about here is really derived from object storage, and really the difference, what makes the difference between a block and file. And we're going to talk on a couple of slides about RPO and RTO and latencies and things like that. But if you look at block, that's been around for decades. Typically the operating system is reading the block and file. They're basically terabytes in the terabyte capacity in the terabytes. You want the latency to be low. Well, I always talk about block is usually a computer using the data, where maybe file and object is a human using the data. Okay, so computers are much less tolerant to high latencies. They get really frustrated if the latency gets up over 10 or 15 or 20 milliseconds. A human, I bet nobody out there can know whether their email is running 10 milliseconds slower today than it was yesterday. So block has got to be high performance. That's why we create this in an SSD tier. You can see the $signs there. It's very, very easy to create over there. Now we go into the file. That's going to be your backend files, your PowerPoint, your Excel, all those other kind of things. Usually it's user defined. It's a person looking at it. Certainly that can get up into the terabytes as well. Latency is still low. It's still pretty darn good for you to get your job done. But maybe they're going to be put on maybe some SSDs, front-ending cache with some hard drives and things like that. So we want to be able to get what we call price performance here. And then we go over to the object storage. We're going to have a higher latency, and I don't want to say high, it may be the wrong word, but higher, and APIs are going to use it. When you basically log into your bank account and you're going to a software as a service application, then basically you're using APIs, you're using HTTP, and you're using things like that. and basically that's going to have a lower cost structure. Now, the reason that it's got the reason why object storage is really outgrowing a lot of the other file types or data types is because of this low cost, this ability to spin it up. You can get to it through your iPads or your iPhones or whatever you want to do and so forth. And then we also look at the different pieces here. So let's go ahead and delve into object storage just for a moment. Big amounts of relatively static data. What's really good for the object storage is this notion of multimedia, music, images, video. If you're going to basically rent a Netflix movie tonight, that's going to be coming off of object storage. If you're going to go to iTunes, that's going to be coming off of object storage. So music and images, things that don't change, things that are sort of static. That you don't change, you don't edit the music file, you don't edit the movie. Basically, it's a chunk. It's something there. Backup files is a chunk. It's an uneditable type of version in most cases. Large data sets, pharmaceuticals, chest X-ray, PACS data, financial data, all those kind of things. Now, if let's say if you say to yourself, well, financial data is changing, Doug, I just made a deposit. What they're going to do is they're going to write a new object out there, and they're no longer going to use the old object. So they're appending to new object, new object, new object. Archiving, web content, all that stuff is really what's causing this huge groundswell of object storage today. If I go across the bottom, we talked about media content, backup, data analytics, a big part of the growth, private cloud, and then remote office and file distribution and all that other kind of stuff. So what makes object storage kind of unique over file and block is it's all about what we call metadata. It's data about the data. And part of the standard is that this metadata is the ability to find and understand what each object is all about. So let's go into a grocery store here and say, oh, there's no labels at all. That's going to make for a very interesting dinner tonight if I pick 20 of these cans and I don't really know what the heck's going on. So what metadata is all about is it describes the objects. It helps you find the right one, tells you what it is, the specifications. Marcus talked about ILM. It talks about the aging of the data and when I want to maybe either delete it or get rid of it, or maybe even archive it out to a cloud. All kinds of things are being able to do that. Access permissions, I can read it, but you can't, or vice versa. Differentiate attributes and so forth. So now I can see that I'm going to have peaches and green beans and tomatoes for dinner tonight, and I can actually understand what those objects are today. So it's an alternative way of storing and organizing and accessing the data. And what it does is it resolves the challenges of efficiency storing massive volumes of unstructured data. We talked about unstructured data a little bit on a couple of other previous slides, but now we have this ability to retain this data for a very long period of time. Performance degrades as capacities grow, perhaps in some environments, massive volumes. If you look at Facebook, all those photos out there, if you look at Netflix, all the movies out there, and if you look at the things out there, it basically is just this tremendous growing area. Now, all this does come with a cost. And the cost for most of the manufacturers out there is that I'm going to let you put the data out there at a very low cost. But every time you put something there, I'm going to charge you some money. And every time you get it back, I'm going to charge you some money. And every time you delete it, I'm going to charge some money, and I'm going to copy it. So we call these APIs between the data and the storage and the gets and the puts and the deletes and all these other things out there are really going to cost some money. And so this will, in fact, in a lot of cases, this will actually become more expensive than the storage itself. So we're going to talk about that on this slide right here. So I'm going to throw it back over to Jeremy. This is something that Jeremy loves to talk about in the interest of Infinite and helping out his customers.
Definitely, Doug. The financial impact of these little words of puts, gets, deletes, and accent copies are huge, right? And if we're talking about the concept we threw around earlier of total cost of ownership, this is where we're taking into account all of the different moving parts that add financial implications. So you can see here, this is actually a real world hyperscaler invoice from one of our customers that had a very modest storage footprint, but was looking to leverage an S3 bucket to store this data so that they could access it as to supplement their SAN storage that was in our data center. So looking at all of the different transfer out costs and the transaction costs and the initial, the cost of the storage bucket per gig cost is what, you know, most customers and most prospects are looking at is, hey, this is what it's going to be. The storage bucket was actually only a third of the total cost in this real world use case. So 2/3 of the costs were somewhat unexpected.
You know, it's really funny. I started working on this webinar with you folks a couple of weeks ago now, and prior to that, of course I talked to an awful lot of customers, and we were talking about some of the gets and puts and the costs and so forth. And I had not seen this invoice, and I hadn't really done it, but I kind of did some math on what is the rule of thumb and what's going on out there, and I kind of came up with this 35 to 65 rule, where about 30 to 35% goes to the storage and about 60 to 65% goes to the actual maintenance or the gets and puts and things like that. Then I saw this and I said, wow, math does work. I actually was able to kind of use this and qualify what we had been talking to. So this is for real. This is really an interesting concept, and this is how a lot of the large hyperscales, hyperclouds are actually getting some of their money back on the low cost object storage as well. So I'm going to turn this back over to Marcus. I hope you guys are enjoying this sort of sportscaster mode. We all have a little bit of different inflection in our voices and a little different stories. So Marcus, take it away.
Thank you, Doug. So what does object storage look like at NFINIT? Essentially, we maintain two flavors that have a largely the same feature set and capabilities, with one little but significant difference. What's common across both versions is a very low cost per gigabyte. Obviously, object-based storage very highly scalable for large amounts of unstructured data. But also key to our deployment is that we do not charge for these gets, puts, deletes, lists, et cetera, et cetera. We call that our freegress model. Noteworthy also for data resiliency, we're on par with everyone else out there on the market. Very, very high degrees of data resiliency. We deploy all our platforms using erasure coding, which gives you upwards of 14 nines of resiliency on the data itself. The NFINIT AO offering is intended for more, I would call it traditional object-based applications, things like content delivery networks, file archives, backups, or JBOF, just a bunch of files. The Object LS adds a software layer that enables the streaming of data from the backend storage. What it actually does, the underlying technology is what's referred to as prefetching, meaning only the data that is actually used by the application accessing the files is fetched from the backend object-based storage. This simulates, I guess you could say, it's not, the storage is not actually being accelerated in any way. Neither is your pipe to the object-based storage itself. However, the experience is a incredibly accelerated consumption of the data, and can be the primary use cases for this Object LS, things like media editing, medical image repositories, large CAD files for architecture or construction, and potentially also big data applications.
Could you think of that, Marcus, as prefetching? I know on disk drives, not only do we read the block we want, but we also prefetch, knowing that we're probably going to want the next 4 or 5 or 6 or 10 blocks. We're going to prefetch those in and put them in cache somewhere. Can you draw an analogy between prefetching here and maybe what we've been doing for years at the hardware level?
So I'm not sure that I can come up with an analogy on the fly, but maybe a short explanation. Regardless of what storage you're working off of, the concept of your application consuming a piece of data. Let's say it's this presentation that we're looking at, which is located on a file share somewhere. If you open up PowerPoint and you open up this particular PowerPoint presentation, the application is going to fetch the whole file from the storage before it's actually opened in your application. What the Object LS enables the application to do is it actually tells the application, hey, I've already got the whole file for you, even though most of it is not actually on your local computer yet. It's just the blocks that the application needs immediately, and a prediction on what what next blocks are necessary are sent to the application, which means you as the consumer or the the presenter or the generator of a presentation like this can immediately start working on your data and your files.
Yeah, prediction. I love that word. That's exactly what it is. So perfect. Great example.
So this is a bit of an eye chart. However, what we're trying to visualize here is the various deployment options that we have. The reasoning behind these various deployment options are that customers have different requirements with regards to availability and resiliency. This depicts our 3 data centers that we operate here in the southwest of the United States. 2 of them in California, 1 of them in the Arizona region. The 2 data centers on the left-hand side, you can see 2 deployments of object-based storage in there. One deployment is there's 4 computer nodes depicted in there. You can see one in the Infinite West Data Center 1. That is just a localized, highly resilient platform here in our lightweight data center. But what we also offer is a stretched deployment across 2 data centers, which, in addition to all the resiliency that we already provide in one data center, provides resiliency against data center outages themselves. The Arizona data center on the right-hand side can be used as either a replication target, just as a geo-redundant target. Again, it expands our options that we have with regards to data availability and resiliency. And of course, the whole infrastructure connected via our multi-carrier blend that is 500 gigabit plus bandwidth to the internet.
Perfect. So let's go ahead and have a conversation here, Jeremy, if you want to kick this off.
Sure. So definitely, I think that everything we've said kind of leads you back to factors in determining what a business continuity plan should be, and we break those down into 2 different areas: technical considerations and the business considerations. And the technical considerations, really the RTO and the RPO, it's not just about establishing them, but then it's saying, okay, does the technology support them, and are we routinely testing and validating that it is doing as performing as expected? From there, we look at the internal resources. And this is something where you got to take a hard look internally and say, do we have the right people in place today with the skill sets and the competencies to manage an additional software platform or platforms? And even more importantly, should they? Are there competing priorities? Are there other things that opportunities that will be neglected because of concentration on these types of activities? Secondly, if you do train them and certify them and get them up to speed, what does that do to their market value? And from a TCO standpoint, does your budget reflect what their new market value worth is, and does that need to be adjusted as well?
Let me go back to RPO. Let me talk about RPO, RTO real quick, Jeremy. And to me, RPO, RTO, recovery point objective, recovery time objective, has really a lot to do with the technology that we choose, the ability of recoverable events that we choose, and then also location. So what we've shared here today is different tiers of storage, different sites, different types of storage, different types of backup means. And what we need to do as a team is craft an environment, backup environment and recovery environment that meets your unique recovery point objectives and your recovery time objectives. Recovery point objectives is when was your last recovery event, if you will. How much data are you willing to lose? And recovery time objective is how long does it take to recover from the event that took place. And we want to basically script this based on all the different types of events. And that's what all the consultants at NFINIT will be able to do, is basically work within that. And I think that and ILM are probably the most powerful pieces of a slide like this. Is, do you know what the RPO and RTO should look like? And I'll let you go over to the business considerations, Jeremy.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think in a lot of those RPO and RTO business decisions are driven by the regulatory and industry compliance. I mean, we see some of these retention policies that are indefinite or 7 years. And now you have to determine how you're going to put a strategy together to meet those requirements and store and make that data accessible. So that goes right back down into your ILM conversation, which you mentioned, Doug. And is your budget aligned to what the business is asking for? And there's some conversations that happen between the technical teams and the business leadership that need to be clear and concise and understood.
Perfect. Understand completely. I've got a couple of questions here that have come in, and people feel free to type in some of them if you wish. I like this one a lot, Jeremy. I think somebody gave this some time. It says, what are the advantages of utilizing a service provider versus a company running the process themselves? So this company, this customer, I'm sure, is considering, they're sort of trying to decide whether they go through somebody like your company or whether they maybe do it themselves. So what would you share to this person?
Well, as we just spoke about, there's financial considerations. Some of the providers offer an economies of scale that allows them to have multi-tenancy, which reduces the cost of having equipment standing by on the ready, licensing that equipment, having data center assets, and then of course the human resources to manage those is a big consideration from the financial side. From a technical perspective, the cloud resources are available. Confirming that and making sure that they've tested it and they understand that, okay, if there's an entire metro outage, how many of my companies around us that are doing the same strategy are going to be competing for those same resources that are on-demand resources? So understanding the policies and procedures around that with the provider are imperative. Looking for geodiversity, geodiversity for backups and environments that provide additional redundancies, but also redundancies and geodiversity in the people. So should you have an issue in your corporate data center and you have all of your people there locally and now they can't access or support the diverse geodiverse assets, then you really have been paying for an insurance policy that you can't execute upon. And then politically, I think one of the things is, understanding the pulse and tone of your organization, understanding how things are perceived. A lot of times, a company will adopt a solution, they'll put it up and get it running, and as technical advancement moves on and things change, they might have a corporate depreciation of 5 years for that investment, and 2 years into the 5-year period, there's much better technology out there that performs better technically, but also has a lower total cost of ownership. But you have technical debt to that solution that you politically sold internally and positioned to be the solution for the future.
Very good. Before I read the next question, you want to go through this 6-month free storage that's on the screen right now?
Sure. So here's the shameless plug for NFINIT here. One of the things that we're doing is we've kicked off the multi-tiered storage strategy with our recently launched object store, and allowing folks to leverage that object store for backup as a service, including Veeam, or for just augmenting their own cloud storage with object. We're going to give folks a 6 months free storage on a 36-month contract to really allow for some relief in the short term on budgets, but also get the ability to transition into a service like this.
Wow, that's fabulous. That's amazing. That certainly helps people, I think, get through the holidays and get things started. Sometimes there's a little bit of a lull through the holidays where people sometimes they may want to have a little bit of technology changes through the weeks that maybe they're down a little bit. So that might line up perfectly with some of that. And I think the last question I have here, this person I believe is considering maybe shifting to cloud or maybe even offsite backup. Through this presentation, I believe they've been seeing some of this. So they say, what are the challenges to shifting to a cloud or offsite backup services, and what would you recommend?
Well, the first challenge is the actually moving of that data, the seeding of the initial data set. Once you get that initial data set up and running, the forever incrementals from there is very light lifting. It can happen quickly. So really the sneaker netting of the initial data set is usually the problem that we solve for first. Here at Infinite, we do that in a couple different ways. We have what we call our Infinite carry-on, which is kind of a snowball of such, where we can take a large array out to a customer site or a colocation facility, and we can actually download all of that data and move it very quickly. So that gives us the ability to do that. Plus, we have a strategy that will be launched in Q1. I don't want to go too far outside of the realm here, but where we're creating a service with Zadara called Infinite Edge, where we would actually put infrastructure on site and allow that on-site managed infrastructure to replicate back to our cloud services.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you for that. So I hope, in summary, I hope that we've given you some things to think about, some new ideas to present maybe to your management teams to be able to maybe solve some of these tough problems that we talked about today. Again, this recording will be sent out. The URL will be sent out. You'll get this deck as well as promised. You didn't have to take a whole lot of notes, but you can go through that. And of all, please contact your Infinite folks right here, sales@infinite.com, and they can really get an architect involved and get some engineering involved and really start to solve some of these problems. So with that, I'm going to turn the day back over to you folks. Thank you so much for joining. Happy holidays, everybody. Happy New Year. We'll be in 2021 before we know it, and hopefully everybody's looking forward to a wonderful and prosperous 2021. So thank you so much, everybody, and enjoy the rest of the day. Bye-bye now.